Good morning students. Hello and welcome to Avyan IAS Academy. I am Anandi and today we will be dealing with one more topic that will come in our NTA NET series. So as you all know that in one of the units they have talked about theories, as I had told you in our syllabus, and amongst all the theories feminism would acquire a special importance. So today we will talk about feminism. So as you all might know that feminism is a large chunk of theory, and covering all of it in this one video wouldn't be possible. So we would be dealing part by part in feminism. This video on feminism would be about an overall structural analysis of the feminism as we know it today. So for feminism, there is first thing, there will be feminism all over the world, right? So feminism in different branches would mean there would be American feminists, there would be British feminists. They are the pioneers of it. The American, the British, and then of course the French feminists. So then there would be third world feminists. Then there would be feminists of color. Then the movement is on and on. The movement, remember that feminism is a movement which had begun quite much in the century, quite long ago, and we really maybe do not attribute the term feminism to the movement which had begun so long ago. However, remember the probably wife of Bath from the prologue or the Canterbury Tale, she was probably one of the first feminists that we can think of. But the idea about feminism is we look at certain literary characters now that we are in posterity at them through our feminist lens. So the feminism as a movement, as it was the women speaking up against the certain patriarchal attitudes, ideas, languages, these were already there, but creating and collating them in form of a proper organized movement had been happening in three waves. The first wave of the three waves of feminism. In the three waves of feminism, the first would be in the 19th and the early 20th century. The second would be the 1960s and 70s. And with the failure of this movement came the 1990s and post that. So this would be the rough idea about the three waves of feminism. However, remember, all the waves that I have talked about are mostly Eurocentric. That has also been one of the primary reasons that we have been criticizing the feminist theories, because mostly the feminist theories who were evolving in these three waves that we know them as in the early 19th and the 19th and early 20th century, 1960s and 70s, to the one in the 1990s, were essentially white females coming from a middle class. So they already had the advantage of their class as well as education, and this feminism was severely criticized by the third world feminists and the feminists of color. So when we talk about the third world feminists, we would be talking about mostly the Commonwealth nations. We would be talking about India. We would be talking about the African feminists. We would be talking about the black feminists. These black feminists wouldn't just be from the third world. They would certainly be people from the American community as well, the American movements. And this has become all the more important because of the fact that we have now the movement of Black Lives Matter. So do stay with us till the end of the video, and do let us know in your comments how you want these classes to proceed, and also if you have any opinions, questions, ideas or suggestions, please do write them in our comment, and do not forget to like, share and subscribe us. So this, as I was talking about these three waves of feminism, the first wave would be in the early 20th century. This was a primary form of movement when the women did not have voting rights. This was mostly about the suffragette rights. Women were still trying to get the right to vote. So it was a huge debate in English Parliament that whether women should have a right to vote or not. They were always treated as second class citizens. They did not have the right to vote. They did not have the right to own properties, and they did not have the right to own their children. So this movement was mostly about getting the getting the ownership of properties, getting the ownership of voting rights mainly. So it was finally voted that women who were above 50 and who had a house had the right to vote. However, with this was just the beginning, and then after the Second World War is what we pick up around the 1960s and the 70s. We pick up the second wave of feminism. That is the most important brand of feminism, probably because most of our theorists like Helen Sissu and all, the Judith Butler, Helen Sissu, later on comes much later comes the American feminists like Adrienne Rich and all, but they had been writing around this time also. So this was a time when the idea of feminist literature developed, what we call the écriture. The feminine écriture, writing through the body. So this during this time, it was an idea that the feminists were telling that the sight or the body as an important part of their writing. However, that was also counter-criticized by people, counter-criticized by other group of feminists, because they thought when you give enough and more importance to the body, you are reducing the feminine or the female entity of a mind or as a piece, as intelligent human souls too. So writing with the body was also another problematic concept that we had during this time. Next, we also, in this second wave, we also talk about what is called the Phallocentricism. That is, the feminists argued that language is essentially patriarchal. They argued that the language that we have expresses the men, and we really do not have a language which could express the female. So that was it, and finally then we come to the 1990s and to the present times, when we have a number of emerging theories, and in this 1990s there would be a number of branches of feminism that would be collating into it. This movement in the 1990s is no longer just restricted to the American, European or the white feminists. This has spread out in number of directions, like we have Toni Morrison, we have Adrienne Rich, we have Chandra Talpade Mahanti, we have also during this time there are post-colonial feminists also who are talking around this time. So there is a blend of what we call, there's a multi-direction in the feminism. There are post-colonial feminists too, mostly coming from people like Gayatri Spivak, people who are talking about both the intersect, that's what we call the intersectional feminism. That's like feminism just not as one larger rubric or chunk of idea, but feminism as an idea which talks about the entry point to various different theories, not just feminism, colonialism, and finally we now have the LGBTQIA and the lesbian feminists that they were there already in the 1990s. A number of these feminist authors were coming out, and that was also an important part of feminism, because many of them were married, happily settled, but they chose to break off those lives and come around and have a much more difficult and uncomfortable life. So that is also another idea of developing feminism. And the black feminists, they had absolutely talked about the fact that the feminism of the first two waves, which had began with someone like Simone de Beauvoir and also like someone like Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Wollstonecraft Treaty on the Rights of Vindication on the Rights of Women in 1798. That was probably the first collated or written treaty which we have on the feminist rights of women. how she talks about about all those things which later we take on in the first wave of feminism. So the third world feminism and the third wave of feminism at the same time was debunking all the myths of the first and the second waves. Mostly it emerged as a result of the failure of the second wave. The second wave had failed to address the feminists of all the different ideas. So for example, so the third wave of feminism is now what we are currently dealing with, and the idea of the third wave of feminism is so important because it's so topical to us, because now we have realized it over the time that women living in different parts of the world have different situations which they encounter. For example, a woman living in India who has to probably go 10 kilometers just to fetch a pail of water is not the same as a American woman who has received a decent education and has received university education, goes to work. Her ideas of feminism are starkly different from a woman in India whose ideas of feminism are far more different and even more difficult. So Chandra Talpade Mohanty had talked about this idea that when we try to label feminist under the larger rubric, and the third world people talking about the sisters, like they are talking about all the feminists in the world as sisters or comrades in arms, we are essentially not looking at the localizations, the histories, or the specific condition which marks each of these women. So that was one of the major differences of the third wave feminism from the other first two waves. Of course, we as in the women in the third world country, we had started getting education a lot later than these people, but you would be maybe you would be surprised to know that even in the European continents the idea of women receiving education was there, but they could not get the university degrees. They were educated maybe along the same side with the men in Oxford and Cambridge, but they were not allowed to receive their degrees. So there's no way of thinking that women, just because they were born in the first world, they had come with all their advantages, but they certainly had a few more advantages above maybe the third worlds, but not all of their advantages. So that was another point of departure. Another very important concept in feminism is the concept of language. We often assume that language is not just, we don't assume, we expect language to express ourselves. However, the feminists in the second wave had argued about a phallocentric language, that language, we do not even have a language which can express the idea of what a woman thinks, because vocabulary is incapable of expressing the ideal of what they think, because our vocabulary is extremely patriarchal and biased and male. So we need to have an entire different range of language ideas in order to accommodate how a woman feels, thinks and acts. So that is what we know as the phallocentrism in a language. It comes from the word phallus, which is the fallacy or the phallus, and from there we get the idea of phallocentrism in a language. So as we have mostly talked about three waves of feminism, it is also said that a fourth wave of feminism has developed. This is still under very much discussion and debate. A fourth wave which apparently came from the 2012 after in India we had the infamous Nirbhaya case, and it is assumed that a fourth wave of feminism had started brewing from this 2012. This movement was all about the rape culture, it was about the body positivity movement, it was against the victim shaming, and then we had the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement, which many of you might know about it, like a large number of people of repute and stature were pulled. A large number of people who in the society who were very established faces in our society were pulled in the Me Too movement, and along with that, this Nirbhaya case had also said to be sparked the controversy which had actually shocked the entire world. There had been ideas of around this rape culture developing in the country even before that, but this was a event of such stature that it had actually, and the Me Too movement which was happening around 2016 coupled with it. So now we are going towards an idea about what is called the post-feminists. So the post-feminists believe in the idea that they are not exactly, this again backlashes the second wave of movement, and they choose to debunk from a number of myths which are given to us in the second wave. They do not actually believe in the idea of, understand something, that the idea of a sex and a gender are two very different things. Gender is the sex is the one that you are given at your biological birth, and the gender is something that we grow ourselves to be in. That is why it is always said that this was also a famous quote in the second wave, that's like, no one is born a woman, they become one. And the other very famous quote of the second wave was, personal is political, because women were mostly restricted to the household, and everything that was personal was supposed to be political also. That was the idea of second wave of feminism. Understand that we in posterity may be criticizing the second wave of feminists quite a bit, but during their time doing that was even an achievement. So that's why it is taken up as a movement. And our times, we have moved much ahead with the help of media, the social media, newspapers, televisions, print, whatever happens now quickly transforms, and becomes a news in our social media. During those times, we really did not have the advantages of social media. So nowadays, even if somebody does something, it is quickly what we call the kind of the Facebook trial that happens. So those ideas were not prevalent during the second waves, that is the 60s and the 70s. So criticizing them might be very easy right now. Of course, there were problematic ideologies that comes as a part of every feminist theory, or as a part of every theory. However, for what I'm trying to say is, during their time, all the waves of feminism together has culminated now towards what we called the entire three waves, and now we are in the post-feminist age, which is culminating towards the fourth wave, which began with the infamous case of the 2012 in India. So we assume that it to be so. However, the very important other parts of feminism which came up are your standpoint feminists. So when they take up certain issues, and for example they talk about a rape, for example they talk about a harassment, they talk about police not reporting a case, or certain such other things, which when the women takes up a particular standpoint, and from there they argue in their position, that is called the standpoint of feminism, just as the name suggests. And another feminism would be of the transgender one, the trans women who do not believe in gender binaries. For example, this could also occur with the trans. There would be three ideas of post-feminism: the trans feminists, so the trans feminists are the trans women who would not believe in, and which comes under the larger rubric of LGBTQIA++, because this community is ever expanding. That's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual. So this we cannot label them. The first idea about this transgender feminism is we should not label them. The moment you try to label them and put them under a gender conformist category is the moment when you try to debunk the entire idea against in which they are working. We cannot label them. You have to remember that LGBTQIA believes in the idea of non-conformity or gender fluidity. That is what we talk about in the trans feminists. They do not particularly believe in the idea of associating themselves with as female, feminine. There are certain traits in which they believe in. the trans feminists are mostly, they are revolting against the misogyny which we have against the trans people. So that is the primary idea of the trans feminists. So these would roughly be about the most of the very very rough idea about feminism. Each of these waves would need, I mean, lectures after lectures to be done. So we are not right now, this was just a first part of your feminism. We'll be doing feminism in parts and bits and parts, and of course we'll be taking up different lectures on to look at texts through the theory and the feminist lens. Of course, when we are talking about feminism, we have to begin talking about someone in someone as early as the 14th or the 15th century, or maybe even before that. It is, I mean, now in posterity we look at them as feminists, but during their time they are just doing what they wanted to. For example, the Helen of Troy, or if you talk about Cleopatra, for example, Cleopatra was someone who had absolutely shaken this entire European rulers like Octavius. So they were so much shaken by Cleopatra's power that they actually they thought that she would create an empire of herself in the eastern parts of the world. So that is what, so they are examples of feminists too. So but during their time they were criticized for being alpha women and such other things. However, as we would move on to these classes, we'll get to know more and more about feminism. However, now we would just like to quickly recap the things which we dealt with. We dealt with the waves of feminism, the first, second, third, and the upcoming fourth wave, which isn't yet completely a wave right now, but it had sparked certain movements, and hence it had, we see, there has been, this is just like I mean, not just the peaks happening in one place. We call something a wave. This is just like the COVID waves we are having. So this is not just about peak in one place. We call them waves when it has been able to influence or impact a certain large number of people, and so much so that it is being called as waves. So these are the few waves that these are the 4 waves that we talked about. Then we talked about the main ideas which were there, beginning from the suffragette movement, the ideas of property rights, and the owning the children, having a house, getting the right to vote, from which was initially from 30 women of property, slowly and gradually got reduced from 21 to 18. So these are the few waves through which feminism has traveled all through, and now finally we have come in an age of post-feminism, right, where we have debunked a certain number of myths. And one very important thing which has remained as an idea of feminism through this all the numerous waves, the peaks or theories are, it is not about hating men, or it is not about bashing men. It is nothing about them in particular. What we are trying to talk about in feminism is against patriarchy, against certain oppression, against misogyny, against the facilities which women do not get as such, because they are mostly would be taken as a second class citizen. They are not given certain rights and facilities which they should be able to get, not just, and they shouldn't be denied of it just because they are women. So that is the bottom line of feminism. And so we also talked about feminists from all the other parts of the world. That would be the black feminists, that would be the Afro-American feminists, that would be the American feminists, then they would be the French feminists, then they would be feminists from even India. So that was roughly our idea about feminism. So we have to understand something, that feminism is not just one thing in particular. It is a large rubric of movement which tries to revolutionize the social, cultural, economic, political, literary, visual arts and architecture, and all of those spheres that we are living in and we can think of. It tries to overhaul the given idea which propagates anything against the women, or tries to take away the rights of women which are their natural rights and which should be given to them. So that would mostly feminism be about. So keep reading. Hope you like this. Thank you and have a great day.